Good evening, everybody. Welcome to those of you out about the world and to everyone here in the Dharma room. Some of you are new here, so welcome. Some of you are new online too, so welcome to you also. Um, for better or worse, you came to hear a Dharma talk tonight. I say better or worse because the topic tonight is death. And people are already moving around and I'm moving around. Every second I get closer to this talk, I get closer to death. Maybe I'll make it through this talk. Maybe I won't. Maybe somebody tonight won't make it through the talk. I remember Zen Master Bon Soeng used to say all the time, nobody guarantees your life. All of us have this idea that we're going to live on into the future somewhere. And yet, we don't know. There's wars going on around the world. Thousands and thousands of people are dying every day in war, in crime, of hunger, of neglect. There's all sorts of reasons for death. Some of them may be in the best circumstances, just old age. So the reason I thought to give this talk tonight is that in my extended circle in my life, there have been 2 deaths over the last couple of weeks, and they're quite different. And I want to talk a little bit about each person who died, because death and life are so intimately connected. We think of them as 2 different things. We're born, we think that's one thing. We die, we think that's another thing. But in fact, it's all one thing. And in fact, life and death is happening moment to moment. If we slow things down enough, we might actually see that in each moment, there's a birth, there's the birth of the moment, and in each moment, there's a death, the death of the moment. And we have this idea that we are constant through that. But perhaps we also are continually being born and dying, born and dying, born and dying, birth and death, birth and death. We don't know. I don't know how it is for you hearing that the talk is about death and opening up the topic, but in some ways, I could stop the Dharma talk right now. Because if you go inside and you feel your experience, you've been opened to death. What's your story? What's your feeling? What's your belief? How do you hold the possibility? Buddhism in Asia is the aspect of the culture that deals with death. In Japan, especially, it's the Buddhists who deal with the rituals of death. And if you've ever heard a Zen type funeral, there's a lot of admonition to I don't know what we'd call it, the dead spirit, the spirit of the dead, to go towards the light. They're shouting at the recently departed spirit, soul. We don't really know what to even call it. How to move forward in the next world. But we don't even know what that next world is. So really, life, death is not knowing. So in the very first interview that we give for new people in our koan practice to open things up, it's this poem called The Human Root. Coming empty-handed, going empty-handed, that is human. When you are born, where do you come from? When you die, where do you go? Life is like a floating cloud which appears. Death is like a floating cloud which disappears. The floating cloud itself originally does not exist. Life and death, coming and going, are also like that. But there is one thing which always remains clear. It is pure and clear, not depending on life and death. Then, what is the one pure and clear thing? That question is like asking, what am I? What is this thing we call life? What is this thing we call death? So the first death in my extended circle of recent death, there's constant death actually all the time. But in the most recent times, a dear friend of mine's father died. And he was, I think it was 100 years old when he died. And he was an ornery fellow, not a particularly likable fellow. And he put his daughters through a lot in those last years of his life. And there was a question almost, would he ever go? Because, of course, he was 100 years old. He wasn't in such good health. He had caretakers around the clock. He fought with his caretakers. He fought with his daughters. He was angry, but he just kept living. But as happens to everyone, ultimately the body gives out. For him, it started very slowly. He was old, but he remained like really healthy and tough. One little thing became another little thing. And over the course of about, 2 months or so, he finally died. And the bit of contact that I've had with my friend reveals that it's quite a difficult legacy, because he was a difficult father, he was a difficult husband, he was a difficult grandfather, and his legacy is quite mixed. So while the inevitable grief appears, so too does the relief and the anger. Life is messy. I think that's actually, while talking about death, what I really want to say is that life is quite messy. We hope things are going to go in a nice, easy and even direction. But we're all mixed animals. Good, bad, right, wrong, up, down. It's all mixed together. In our delusion, we hope for clarity for one thing. But we're all so complicated. So in the second death, it was a bit different. The woman who died was the wife of a very old friend of mine. And she had early onset Alzheimer's. And my friend, who's my age, he's an old high school friend, spent these past 8 years caretaking for her. And before that, he spent about 3 years taking care of his mother. And his whole life got narrowed into the life of a caretaker. And now, kind of quickly, she actually went down and died at the end. And now he doesn't even understand where he is. What is his life now? And in the conversations we've had, what is the legacy of what he's been through? We don't understand. We don't know. We try so hard to have some explanation, some clarity, but we don't know. And our Zen training is a training to learn how to be with not knowing, to learn how to be with death. In a way, it's a practice preparing us for, maybe we could call it the big death that we think happens at the end. If it's really the end, we don't know. And if our birth is really the beginning, we don't know that either. But we think of that. But we also have to deal with the insecurity and the fears of the small deaths that are happening. the loss of this moment. The thing that we hold in our hands that is so precious disappears. It's gone. How do we deal with this life and with this death? So I went to the internet and I started looking for death poems. And I've got a couple to share with you. It's a tradition in Asia, especially in the Zen world, for teachers to write a death poem. What I found is there's a lot more than just teachers who write death poems. So I'm going to start with just a couple. They're short. So, at last I am leaving. In rainless skies, a cool moon, pure is my heart. Even a lifelong prosperity is but one cup of sake. A life of 49 years is passed in a dream. I know not what life is, nor death. Year in, year out, all but a dream. Both heaven and hell are left behind. I stand in the moonlit dawn. So now I want to give two Zen poems. One's from Dogen, who's credited as the founder of the Soto lineage, and one is from Kyung Ho, who is actually the founder of our Zen lineage that we practice here from Korean Zen. So first, Dogen. 54 years, I've hung the sky with stars. Now I leap through. What shattering? Kyung Ho. The mind moon is very bright and round. Its light swallows everything. When both mind and light disappear, what is this? What is this? That's our Kangan. That is the practice of Zen. Whatever ideas we have, whatever feelings we have, whatever desires we have, we turn back to the question, what is this? What am I? The question isn't so much in the words. The question is in the experience. Sometimes I think the ultimate Kangan is what? Just allowing for the opening, for the possibility, for the moment to appear in ways that we really don't understand. It's a kind of death, I suppose, to drop our ideas enough to witness the moonlight in the sky, the stars as they're shining. We don't really understand them. Even for me, just in my lifetime, the photography that now shows us the stars and the universe, it's so much more vivid. For most of history, we look up and we see these little pins of light. We don't understand what they are. Science gives us some clues. And are we really different than the stars? We're all made of the same substance. Where does that substance come from? We don't know. You know, I talk about this often, just going back to my basic high school chemistry and the study of the periodic table of elements. What really hit my mind, even way back then, was that everything was made up of the same substances. In the old days, I don't know if it's different now for high school students, but for me, it was simple protons, neutrons, and electrons. And everything on that whole chart is made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. The thing that makes carbon different from oxygen isn't that they're completely different on its most molecular level or atomic level. It's just how many of those protons, neutrons, and electrons make up the atom that we call carbon or oxygen or hydrogen or anything. It's all the same substance. In Dropping Ashes on the Buddha, Zen Master Bon Soeng, in his first chapter, he says, it's like an animal cookie factory, a big vat of dough. And you scoop up that dough and you put it into a mold and you get an elephant, a tiger, an ant, a monkey, a human being, a dinosaur. Doesn't matter. It's all the same substance. And if that's true, then what's born and what dies? If we as a human being are made up of all these different substances and energies, when we die, where does it go? I know for myself, I've had the experience of sitting with someone who's dying. And that moment of death, it's like you're just sitting there and there's this faint exhalation and then nothing. What happened? What is it? We don't know. And what is our life? Again, life and death, same coin, different faces. So how do we practice with death? Any kind of spiritual practice is really about facing death, whether it's the death of this moment, whether it's the loss of something we love, whether it's the attachment to something we love that we're afraid to lose. We're constantly trying to keep the forces of life at bay. So our Zen practice is about settling down enough to actually witness what life is. If we want to understand what death is, we have to understand what life is. Not just our story and our idea of what it is, but what is it? Can we study ourselves? When I was doing my master's thesis, getting my counseling degree, I came across a Japanese writer's quote, and he said, "Philosophy is the study of what is a human being. Zen is the study of what am I." What is it that lives? What is it that dies? And in this moment, how is it that we live? What are we doing with the energy of life that we actually have? And again, it's not simple. None of us are all one thing. We're all a mixture of a lot of things. There's often, I guess this fits. In the news this week, there was a story about the writer Alice Munro, who was a very famous short story writer, won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And it came out that her daughter had been abused and molested by her husband, who was the stepfather of the daughter. And I don't know the whole story in clear enough to say it clearly, but the end result was Alice Munro, decided to stay with her husband. And her daughter felt so betrayed that it severed the relationship between the two of them. It's interesting. There's an article in the Washington Post today, written by one of our Sangha members in the Choge International Zen Center of New York. There's a writer and a professor of literature, and he wrote a story in the Post today about this situation with Alice Munro. And what he pointed out, and I'm characterizing it a little bit, I encourage you to go to the article, but the secret was in plain view in her stories. That if you saw her stories, that a lot of her stories were about kind of hiding things and betrayals and separations. So I think where I'm drawing the connection here is that each one of us reveals ourselves in our lives. It's hard to see ourselves, but we express our nature moment to moment. And if we can practice with death, that leads us right back to the question, how do I live my life? And if we can really investigate ourselves, we can actually see who we are. We have to slow things down. We have to bring our energy down into our lower abdomen and then just wonder, what am I? And not think about it. Watch. Use our eyes. Watch from our center. What am I? We're all constantly revealing ourselves. What is our own nature? We don't have to understand it, but we can witness it. You know the feeling, somebody walks into a room and you get a whole sense of them. I can't say you're completely right or completely wrong, but we reveal ourselves. Our practice is refining our life. What am I? What am I doing right now? For me, dealing with these last couple of weeks of anxiety and turmoil on the political and social front has, on one hand, it's been horrible. On another hand, it's a doorway to perceive ourselves, to find out who we are. The Buddha said, life is suffering. I don't think he meant that every single thing and every single moment is suffering. But we're constantly dealing with the struggle of being alive. And our job as a human being is to come to terms with that. When the moment of the big death arrives, will we be ready? Can we be present for even that? And in the very small death that happens moment to moment, can we learn from it? Can we be open enough to see that the universe is revealing itself? That's our job as practitioners. And when we do practices here at the Zen Center or online, as we're all practicing together, primarily we're sitting and turning our energy inward. We may sit for 25 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe 2.5 hours. Some of us choose to sit longer retreats. In 2 weeks or so, we're going to have a 3-day retreat led by our new Jito Popsani Marshall White. It's a chance to turn inward and to wonder. And it's not easy. But grappling with existence isn't easy. But if we grapple, we can grow, we can learn, we can be present, we can express our aliveness in this moment. When I was in college, I read the teachings of Don Juan. And one of the things that has sat with me my entire adult life is the phrase he used. He said, remember, death is sitting over your left shoulder, and it's your best advisor. If I'm going to die, how am I going to live this moment? If I can remember that things are finite, how will I appear in this moment? Each one of us gets to decide. Each one of us needs to find our own way. Zen doesn't tell us how to be. Zen is kind of an offshoot from Buddhism. It doesn't even say you should be a good person. Find your way. What am I? That's our practice. Death awaits for all of us, whether in this next moment or somewhere out into the future. In this very moment, somebody's dying. Somebody is close to death. Somebody needs something from each one of us. We fail quite often. Try for 10,000 years was the admonition from our teacher, Zen Master Bon Soeng. Wake up. Now is your time.